Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, making sure you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. There is a 7-day free trial for you to try the service out for free. And you can see why there's over 70 plus subscribers on this platform now, with access to over 3,500 fighter profiles stretching 17 different promotions. And just letting you know, to close out May, we got an action-packed month of MMA action left. Let's just quickly run down the list here. PFL Middle Eastern goes down this week. Brave CF, KSW, UFC, Fury FC 90. Next week, ACA 175, Bellator Paris, UAE Warriors 49 and 50, A1 Combat 20, LFA 184. All 4 episodes of the Road to UFC. And then May 25th weekend, we have Cage Warriors 172, Brave CF 83, A1 Combat 21. And then to end off the month, ACA 176 on May 31st. And then the following day, we have June 1st, UFC 302. All of those cards are available on the MMA Fight Archive with direct links to past fights for all the fighters competing on those cards. Not to mention the rest of the schedule for 2024 is pretty much on there. Everything that's been announced is up on there so you guys can get nice and early on your researching if that's what you're hoping to do. Check out the MMA Fight Archive. I am the best in the world in finding tape on these fighters from all over the world, and that's why all the top coaches, analysts, capras, gamblers, fighters utilize the service to ensure they can do the best research possible. Once again, 7-day free trial available. Check the link in the description below. Now let's get into the episode. This week we're going over UFC St. Louis headline by a heavyweight fight between Derek Lewis going up against Rodrigo Nascimento. And then we also have St. Louis's own Joaquin Buckley in the co-main event taking on Nursultan Ruziboev. Both guys competed on the Atlantic City card to end off March, and they get a quick turn here just so Buckley can compete in front of his hometown crowd. And then Ruziboev obviously wanting to stay busy, didn't take any damage in the Dumas fight, so it makes sense as to why he is jumping in on this opportunity. All right, I've gotten some complaints in regards to how long I've been doing some of these intros. So this will be the last time that I do a full out recap for the previous week. And what I'm going to be doing for the recaps now is adding it to my immediate reaction show that I drop after every single event on Saturday evenings. So you guys can get an in-depth look on my recaps there. I will still cover moving forward at least my lock of the night prediction and my dog of the night prediction for the previous weekend's UFC event. But then if you guys want the rest of it, you guys can check out the media reaction show, like I said, that I drop at the end of every show. But this will be the last show where I go over the full card from the previous weekend. Moving forward, we'll change it up for you guys. So let's get into the recap. Didn't do so hot on LFA on Friday, which was their Brazilian card. Lost out on the lock of the night play. Lost out on the dog of the night play, although with an asterisk, that fight ending due to, or at least the ending coming due to a headbutt. Very unfortunate circumstance there, especially with the underdog looking so good at plus 325. Got to take the L sometimes in those spots. Bounced back pretty well on OKTAGON 57, I believe it was, the morning of UFC 301. And then we pretty much go and get into the black for UFC 301. So just quickly talk about that here. Lock of the night play hits with Mick Tybeck Orobai coming through at minus 249. I was hoping that he'd be able to get Brenner out of there earlier. Still sweeps him on the scorecards besides that 1 point being taken away in the third round. Could have finished him if he let his hands go a little bit more, but it is what it is. Goes out there, dominates, gets his hand raised on the scorecards. Our dog of the night play, Jack Shore, gets absolutely butchered by Joe Anderson Brito and then gets the fight stopped due to a cut to the shin, which was very awkward, very weird. Should not have been stopped. It was not affecting the fight whatsoever. And I was really hoping for Shore to start coming on later on in that matchup, but it really seemed like the strength advantage for Brito caused Shore a ton of problems, and he was unable to get off on much of his game at all. So we take an L there. Now let's go top to bottom on this graphic that I have for you guys. Steve Erceg, 1 year at plus 170, looking damn good. Going out there and showcasing to people that he's worthy of being a possible champion in the UFC. And had he not grappled in that final round, likely would have come away with that flyweight strap, going out there and outstriking Alexandre Pantoja. Maybe just needs one more fight to give it himself back into a title fight. But I would love to see him, change up a little bit in terms of his approach in some fights. Doesn't need to grapple. He's one of the better strikers in the division with his footwork, his range management, his shots down the pipe. Would have been great if he was able to cash that. So we -1 unit on him there, and then -0.6 units on his round props that I stabbed round 3, round 4, round 5. Again, if he just stuck with the striking a little bit more, and credit to Pantoja. Major chin, was able to eat some big shots and still managed to walk through all of that stuff. But, I felt like Usyk underperformed ever so slightly, but we have to rip up that ticket. Jose Aldo probably should have been the dog of the night play as he goes out there and sweeps Jonathan Martinez on the cards, but we have to rip up our half unit ticket at +700 on him to win by knockout. And it was clear he was just going in there to win, as he did have Martinez on wobbly legs late in that matchup. And rather than throwing down and risk getting countered and knocked out, although it seemed Martinez was so out on his legs that he would not have been able to muster up a finish of any sort, Aldo decides to take him to the ground, grind him out. We get the dub on the money line spot, but have to rip up half a unit of that profit due to him not getting the knockout there. So it would have been great if he was able to cash that for us. Moving on down, Kevin Borjas gets finished by Alessandro Costa in the second round with nasty leg kicks. It seems like Borjas was not at all prepared to deal with those calf kicks. As the first couple that Costa landed, Borjas was debilitated right from the jump. So we have to rip up that ticket as well. And then the last spot that cashes for us here, Kyle Bahayu inside the distance at -125. Wish I went a little bit deeper on that. I knew that it was going to be a spot that he would be very successful with, especially with using his grappling defensively and then beating Paul Craig up on the feet. We saw that play out exactly how I had drawn it up. So, like I said, we end up in the black for the UFC plus 0.34 units there for a 3% ORI. Again, OKTAGON, some solid profit, but a nasty loss on LFA on Friday. So in the weekend, we're down on the weekend, and is what it is. We try to recoup, get back onto the battlefield here and get back into the winning ways. Lock of the night plays go 2-1. Dog of the night plays go 0-3. Got to do better. We got 3 events this weekend. Like I said, UFC St. Louis. We also have PFL Middle East going down on Friday, which I'll have written breakdowns for, as well as KSW going down, I believe, on Saturday morning. So if you want breakdowns for those 2 events, make sure you guys check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link to that in the description below. You'll also get early access to the Locky 2-step Locky Trinity parlay, which has been killing it this year. I drop it for free to the public on Fridays, but usually by then the parlay is not as juicy as it is earlier in the week. So if you want access to that, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page to get in on that. And then lastly, shout out to the folks over there at GodzillaWins, providing your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns on a weekly basis. Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdowns. Fridays, we drop the 3 best money line spots. So if you guys want to check that out, I'll have links to those in the description below once they've been posted, or just go to GodzillaWins.com and check out all the other great content that they have available for you guys. All right. Not wasting any more time here. I believe we got 13 fights lined up for this St. Louis card. So let's get right into this bad boy. First fight up is going to be a flyweight matchup between JJ Aldrich, who comes in at +120, taking on the streaking Veronica Hardy, who comes in at -140. We'll start off on the JJ Aldrich side of things, who's riding a 2-fight winning streak after she had previously snapped a 2-fight losing streak. She was getting the better of Erin Blanchfield through the course of 6 minutes or 5 minutes before she got caught in a guillotine choke and was forced to submit that night. Then she got completely butchered by Ariane Lipski, but she managed to bounce back with a dominant victory over Anal Young, and then going out there and pulling off the upset victory over Montana De La Rosa I believe that was back in October, or it was earlier this year. I don't recall. Regardless, it was a short notice opportunity for Aldrich, and she goes out there and blows De La Rosa out the water. Clean sweeps that fight, and I was very surprised that she was an underdog, and if I'm not mistaken, she was my dog of the night play going into that matchup as well. Aldrich is a solid southpaw who utilizes her boxing very well. She has a nice crisp jab down the pipe. She does a good job with her footwork in terms of moving in and out of range, dictating the pace that way. And she has a good sense in terms of her output and volume, in terms of staying ahead of her opponents, in terms of how much she's throwing and countering effectively, which is something that she does very well. Her defensive takedown game is pretty good. She has to watch her neck, as we saw in the Erin Blanchfield fight, but for the most part, she does a good job in terms of keeping fights upright, where she can utilize her boxing advantage, which is, criminally underrated in my opinion, as most people don't really give her a lot of respect. She's 13-6 as a fighter, but definitely a perennial gatekeeper in this flyweight division for that top 10 to 15 range of the division. She could probably even crack the top 8 depending on the run that she can go on, but still a solid fighter. Her opponent, Veronica Hardy, has been nothing but solid since returning from a 3-year layoff. Obviously, she returned as Veronica Hardy and no longer Veronica Macedo, as she did get married to Dan Hardy, and it seems like he's instilling a lot of great wisdom and game planning on her as she goes out there and executes great game plans over her win against Juliana Miller, and then obviously most recently against Jamie Lynn Horth. A lot of that having to do with tapping into her Taekwondo background, where she utilizes a lot of lateral movement, utilizes her speed in terms of crashing the pocket, getting off on a couple combinations, and then pivoting back out into open space so that it's difficult for her opponents to try to counter her. She uses a lot of kicks and fast hands when she does enter the pocket, but it seems like she just has one goal in mind when she enters the pocket: get off on your 2, 3, 4, 5 strike combination, and then get back out before you get dragged into a war inside the pocket where opponents will more than often have success against her. It does seem like she struggles a little bit in terms of maintaining her cardio when it goes into deep waters, as we saw in the Jamie Lynn Horth fight. It seemed like the momentum was shifting the Horth side, but I thought Hardy still did enough through the first 8-ish minutes of that matchup to still end up getting her hand raised by decision that night. It's a difficult style to keep up, continuously moving and then you're relying on your speed and movement to try to get the wins, but it seems like against certain opponents she should be successful with that based on the stylistic clash that she has. And based on what she has here against JJ Aldrich, it seems to me that this is a spot that she can get away with that style. JJ Aldrich is going to have to wait until Hardy really engages in the pocket with her for her to have much success. Now, Aldrich could land some good counters whenever Hardy does crash the pocket here, as Aldrich does have a height and reach advantage ever so slightly in this spot. But I think the main difference maker here is going to be the movement and the speed of Hardy, which will allow her to land more effective damage through the first 6 to 7 minutes of this matchup. And I think she can continue to do that to at least rack up the first 2 rounds before Aldrich's countering ability starts to catch up with her. Aldrich is not as aggressive of a fighter as Horth is, which will allow Hardy to really get off on her damage and kind of just continue to skirt away at distance without feeling too much resistance and footwork coming back her way from the Aldrich side of things. So I'm going to lean Hardy here, and I think we see her go out there, touch up JJ Aldrich over the course of 15 minutes and win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, we got welterweights going out of here as we have Jared Gooden looking to follow up his submission victory over Wellington Turman last time around, now coming in as a plus 185 favorite, going up against Kevin Jousset, who comes in at minus 215. Now we'll start off on the Jared Gooden side of things, who went 1-3 in his first stint with the UFC, then went 3-1 on the regional scene before getting the short notice call back to take on Carlston Harris in a fight that he missed weight by 7 pounds. Absolutely atrocious that he missed weight by that much and still ended up losing. But it really irked me that night that he ended up taking that short notice spot, and then people saying, oh, we got to give him some slack because he took this fight on short notice. You take this fight on short notice knowing that you can get at least close to the weight class, not closer to the next weight class. And that was very infuriating for me because you know how many fighters are trying to make it to the UFC and how many of them try to rely on these short notice opportunities to try to jump back into the UFC and make it. But for some reason, Jared Gooden gets the call up and then misses weight by 7 pounds, loses the fight, and still gets more opportunities to fight. It is what it is. Regardless, he's a big power puncher, has some good power, like I said, power punching style, moving forward, looking for knockouts over his opponents. He was getting worked by Wellington Turman through the first 5 minutes of their fight. Turman landing a good takedown and then doing good work from on top. And then Turman deciding to strike with him a little bit longer than he should have, getting caught by the big power of Gooden. And then Gooden went on to go out there and club and sub Wellington Turman. I believe that Gooden is highly reliant on getting those early finishes and trying to knock out his opponents more so than actually going out there and putting together a good enough body of work to win his fights on the scorecards. And it's going to be a tough task for him to go up there and try to derail the streaking Kevin Jousset, who's currently 2-0 now in the UFC, coming in as a minus 215 favorite, trading out of the City Kickboxing crew down there in the New Zealand area. Last time I broke him down strictly as a kickboxer, and it's hard not to, considering the style that you see him fighting with. Very active with his jab, good calf kick as well to keep his opponent busy and try to slow them down as well. But he actually comes from a judo background, and you can see glimpses of that, especially late in his fight against Kanan Song, where he hits that beautiful judo throw. But it seems like he's so engulfed in the striking game that he's just so successful there now that it's hard for opponents to have much success outside of that. So it's good to know that he has a grappling to lean on if he needs it, but I don't know if he could be super effective with it because I'm not fully on board with the amount of control that he can get against some of his opponents. It's really the striking. It's the educated jab. It's the consistent leg kick. It's the movement. It's the distance management. It's sticking that jab out there anytime his opponent tries to crash the pocket. That's what continuously frustrates his opponents, and that's how he goes out there and outstrikes a striker like Kanan Song. Now, in this matchup, it's going to be tough for him to maintain that distance and keep the hyper-aggressive Gooden out of his range and away from trying to land that big power. So it wouldn't hurt Jousset to go out there and try to get some of his judo going, just to mix up the range a little bit, just to keep Gooden away from his power early on in this matchup, and then maybe stick with that jab and that calf kick from distance and really just butcher Gooden from that range spot. So I do like Jousset to go out there, possibly even win this fight by decision, which currently sits around plus 175. But I think that we might see some Gooden love come in here. I think there's going to be a lot of people discrediting Jousset's current run and current skill level and thinking that Gooden can make this more competitive with the knockout power that he presents. But as this line continues to drop, I may look to get in on some Jousset action, as I think he can stick with that beautiful jab, showcase that he has a good enough chin and durability, and educated enough game planning that he can go out there and really outwork a guy, in my opinion, who just has that one path to victory of trying to knock a guy like Jousset out. So I like Jousset. I think there's more paths to victory here. We can't completely overlook the knockout power of Gooden, but I do think we'll see Jousset go out there and put on a good body of work and go out there and win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got a flyweight matchup here between Charles Johnson, who comes in at plus 140. He takes on Jake Hadley, who comes in at minus 160. Now, starting off on the Charles Johnson side, he stopped a three-fight losing streak last time around as he picked up a big win over a previously undefeated Azat Maxim, and that was a matchup where he did a great job in terms of nullifying the takedown and grappling game of Maxim, something that has been a big thorn in the side of Johnson during that three-fight losing streak he was on, and then go out there and utilize his striking, believing in his hands a little bit more, and then picking up that decision victory, like I said, over Azat Maxim. Johnson is a guy who on the regional scene would normally do a great job in terms of utilizing his movement and his output to really touch his opponents up, and not a big finisher, but a good stinging striker, especially when he throws in combinations and gets into his groove. I think that's what causes his opponents a lot of problems when he does get into that groove. But what opponents in the UFC have found successful is to pin him up against the cage, look to drag him to the ground, and keep him defensive for the most of that time. He's been somewhat gun-shy in those matchups, which is why he ended up coming up short, because he was just, I don't know, either fearful of his opponent initiating a clinch or the grappling situation, or he just wasn't really believing in his hands at the time. But it was a big confidence booster for him last time around to hand a undefeated fighter their first professional loss, but also showcase the takedown defense, get-ups, and confidence in his hands, which ended up leading to that victory that he was looking forward to for oh so long. Now, he goes up against another grappler here in Jake Hadley, who's 2-2 now in the UFC, but most recently coming off a loss to Cody Durden, who proved to be the superior wrestler that night, but also landed some big damage that caused a nasty cut on Jake Hadley in that first round and continued to bother him throughout that matchup. But it seems like Hadley is coming up short against guys that are superior grapplers, especially in specific categories. Durden, better wrestler. Nascimento handing Jake Hadley his first professional loss in his first UFC fight, being the better BJJ specialist. Hadley is a strong BJJ specialist. Like, he's very good in terms of transitioning, latching onto chokes, keeping opponents into bad positions, but he hasn't really been chasing the takedowns in his UFC career, as he's been going out there and finishing opponents either with his hands or submissions of his own. His striking game has very much improved since his UFC debut, and that's what attributed to his knockout victory over Malcolm Gordon, but also his ability to just stay competitive with his opponents by throwing his hands. He's a lanky guy for 5'7" with a 70-inch reach, and that allows him to really just plant his feet and throw his hands from distance and land with some good power and some good sting. In this specific matchup against Charles Johnson, I think Hadley has a little bit more paths to victory in terms of being able to go out there and stifle Johnson up against the cage, maybe even utilizing his grappling a little bit more effectively than he's been doing over the last couple of fights. I think Johnson will clearly have the striking advantage in this matchup, being the faster striker with his hands, throwing better combinations. But I think if Hadley mixes his striking, tries to stay competitive at least in terms of the output, he can make some takedowns behind that and make things shaky. Now, Johnson clearly showed improvements in his last matchup, but we have to acknowledge that Maxim was a guy that seemed to get demoralized and start to slow down with his cardio when he was unable to be successful with his grappling. Hadley seems to be a guy that looks to have a good enough grappling game and good enough cardio to go 15 minutes if he needs to, and he has a good enough striking game to be somewhat competitive with Johnson, although I'd still give the edge to Johnson in that round. I don't want to completely flip on the pendulum here on Johnson, as I did fade him last time around, faded him in the fight before that, Rafael Lestavam as well. But I will give him his credit. I will still pick Hadley to win this fight, but minus 160 is a little bit too wide for me. You got to take into consideration the hometown angle for Johnson, the motivation that he has coming into this matchup to perform in front of his home crowd, but we cannot overlook or overstate the possible grappling edge that Hadley could have here, especially if he's able to go out there and keep that cardio-heavy approach, keeping him moving forward and keeping him on the defensive for the majority of this matchup. So give me Hadley and Hadley by decision. Next up in the welterweight division, we got Billy Goff coming in at plus 135, going up against Trey Waters, who comes in at minus 155. Now, we'll start off on the Goff side, who's riding a very solid winning streak at this point in time. 1-0 in the UFC, picked up that big win on the Contender Series to originally earn his contract to the UFC. But this guy is an all-around solid fighter. He has a good grind, good wrestling game if he needs to rely on that, but also has great heart, determination, and durability as he showcased throughout his career. This guy closes the pocket with solid aggressiveness and utilizes a combination striking style to hurt his opponents, utilizes pressure, and eventually put these guys away. And that's what I love about his game, his durability, his cardio, and his consistent forward pressure in terms of trying to keep his opponents in the most uncomfortable positions possible. We saw him utilize a beautiful body shot to the liver last time around to get away or to get Yusaku Kinoshita out of there, just showcasing that the consistent forward pressure, make his opponent slow down, and then attacking the body so aggressively is very a very solid and advantageous style that he continues to use throughout his career. I don't think that he's just a striker as most of people have seen, but we've seen some solid grappling chops from him on the regional scene as well, where he was actually a double champ for the CES promotion. He's going up against a very tough fighter here in Trey Waters, who has a very long and lanky frame for this welterweight division, standing at 6'5" with a 77-inch reach, and he does a great job in terms of utilizing his jab and keeping his opponents at bay. But where he has seemed to struggle in the past, where it was against other opponents who were able to touch him up for distance, like Jalen Fuller, but also guys that were able to go out there and out-grapple him, like Bennett, who was pretty much winning 14 minutes of that fight before Trey Waters was able to land a big knee after the referee had stood him up due to an activity, and Waters was able to save himself from defeat that night by getting that finish, and that set him up for that Contender Series shot against Gabriel Bonfim in a fight where he wasn't doing too bad to start off the fight, but eventually he got hurt, clubbed, and subbed that night as Bonfim was able to secure his UFC contract. Waters did manage to work his way back to the UFC after winning the LFA title, getting that short notice opportunity against Josh Quinlan, and then working behind that beautiful jab for the course of 15 minutes, as it seemed like Quinlan only had one option, and that was try to grapple Waters, and he was unable to get him to the ground, and then was stuck at distance as he continued to get peppered by that jab, and he had no answer in terms of getting into that range. He was relegated to just sitting out at distance and allowing Waters to dictate the pace of that fight, which allowed Waters to be so successful. Now, in terms of this matchup, I expect Goff to bring more fury and more aggressiveness than we saw from Quinlan last time around, which is going to cause Waters some uncomfortable situations, having to fight off of his back foot, which is something that he's not like an amateur in. Obviously, he can be successful off of his back foot, but given the pressure and pace that he's going to feel from Goff, I think Goff can make this very competitive and actually pull off the victory in the spot. I could see Goff utilizing his striking to eventually open up takedown opportunities and then completely nullify the height and reach advantage of Waters by pummeling him on the ground and then eventually working for a finishing opportunity. This will be tough in the early going, but it's really going to come down to Goff to kick this fight off from the jump, put that pressure on Waters right away, and don't let him get comfortable from distance. And given Goff's style, I think he could be successful in doing that. So Waters is a tough puzzle to crack at 6'5", at 170 pounds with a 77-inch reach. In this matchup, he's going to have about a 6 to 7 inch height advantage and then a 5-inch reach advantage. But this is nothing Goff is new to. This guy has been in other matchups where he's been the smaller guy, but his aggressiveness and ability to crash the pocket with effectiveness will make him very difficult to deal with for a lot of fighters. And I think that showcases once again this weekend, which is why an underdog shot on Billy Goff is not a bad spot to take. All right, next up, we got strawweights going at it here as we have Tabitha Ricci coming in at -130, going up against the returning Tisha Pennington, who comes in at +110. We'll start off on the Tabitha Ricci side, who had her winning streak snapped last time around by Lupita Godinez in somewhat of a close fight, as Ricci did manage to have some striking success. She was unsuccessful in terms of getting her grappling going, which is where she is normally the most successful by utilizing her BJJ black belt, but it's clear that she has been improving her boxing game, where she's been able to land some big shots, like I said, on Lupita Godinez. I think she even hurt her badly and dropped her in a couple of these spots. But for the most part, she wants to rely on her grappling, looking to take opponents to the ground, control her from that top position, maybe even open up submission opportunities for herself. But it's very encouraging to see her sharpening her hands the way that she has so that she can be successful in matchups where she's unable to get the takedowns. It didn't work out for her last time around against Lupita Godinez, but that's a great learning experience for her, especially moving forward and especially going out there and fighting more experienced fighters, tougher fighters, and moving up the rankings. Her opponent this weekend, Tisha Pennington, formerly Tisha Torres, returns to the cage after 2 years away after giving birth to the first child between her and bantamweight champion Raquel Pennington, and she looks in phenomenal shape. She got into shape pretty much right after her birth and was more than ready to go out there and try to make the most of her latter years in this MMA game. She's 34 years old, so it's clear that her time is ticking, but she never really slowed down completely in her MMA career, and I think she's still capable of some high-level performances. Her last matchup against Mackenzie Dern, I thought she did enough to win rounds 1 and 3, even though she was the one moving backwards pretty much that entire fight. She did a great job in terms of being the matador against Mackenzie Dern, who was being the bull, and she landed some great shots off of her back foot, even while Dern was trying to crash the pocket with wild, reckless shots and looking to get the grappling game going. Tisha has great takedown defense, and she's very fast and agile with her striking approach, which makes her very difficult for a lot of opponents to land cleanly on her. The most impressive performance that we've seen from her, actually, she's had a couple of them. The Brianna Fortino fight, where she stuffed 5 of 7 takedown attempts from Fortino, but even when she did get taken down, she got immediately right back to her feet and utilized her striking advantage. But even the Angela Hill fight, where she didn't even take a grapple-heavy approach and still managed to go out there and outstrike Angela Hill, who's been known to be the superior striker whenever she goes into the cage. So that showcases to us that Pennington is a solid all-around veteran. She's been around the game for a very long time, is skilled in pretty much every facet of the game, and I think that experience is going to allow her to go out there and get the upper hand here against Tabitha Ricci. The only thing keeping me from actually getting to the betting window for Pennington in this spot is the fact that she's coming off such a long layoff, coming off of giving birth. It's going to take a little while for her to get her feet under her, to get the timing right, to get back into live action the way that she will be this weekend, but this will be a great opportunity for her to get the rust off and get back into the cage and try to get back to the activity level that she had before she ended up giving birth. This is a great stylistic match for her. I think she has the takedown defense to keep this fight upright, and I think her speed and footwork will cause a lot of issues for Ricci, who would prefer to try to throw down in the pocket and let go with her combination striking style. So I'm going to go with Pennington here. Pennington by decision. it seems like the line is closing a little bit, so my interest in terms of betting this fight is completely gone. But if somehow we get late week action on Tabitha Ricci and somehow get Tisha Pennington up to that plus 150 range, that's probably the only way I would be interested in taking a shot in this fight. All right. Next up, we got a barn burner here in the lightweight division between Terrence McKinney, who comes in at plus 140, going up against Esteban Ribovics, who comes in at minus 160. Now, last time around, Terrence McKinney was able to get the first winning streak of his UFC career since the first winning streak of his UFC career when he had his first two UFC matchups, as he has defeated Mike Breeden and Brendan Marotte. Marotte, he defeated in about 20 seconds, who he was able to hurt with a very nasty knee and then follow up with some very nasty ground and pound. And he continues to stick with the style of just being a guy that goes out there and either gets that early finish or ends up gassing out by the 4th or 5th minute and giving up a finish to his opponent. So first and foremost, under 1.5s are always live in Terrence McKinney fights, especially getting them down to that minus 200, minus 250 range rather than the minus 400 that we've seen in the past. McKinney is a firecracker to start off fights. His striking, a lot of it has to do with fast and powerful high kicks where he's able to hurt his opponents even if they're able to get their guard up, but also has a nasty wrestling game where he's able to take opponents to the ground and dominate to the point that he can get to a quick dominant position and either open up a submission opportunity or get some big ground and pound off and get his opponents out of there. It seems like he has a horrible fight IQ in terms of managing his gas tank, but he's more than happy because he's always able to go out there and either get that win and avoid extended losing streaks, which will likely extend his UFC career. He's very difficult to contain early in matchups because of his speed, explosivity, and athleticism, and that's why he'll always have the upper hand over a certain level of fighter. Is that level of fighter this weekend in Esteban Ribovics? Well, let's talk about Ribovics real quick. He picked up his first UFC victory last time around against black belt Kamwela Kirk in a fight where he did not do well in the first round, as Kirk managed to get a takedown and have some good spots on the mat. But it seemed like Kirk started to fall off in terms of cardio and efficiency in the second and third rounds, allowing Ribovics to touch him up and do some good damage with his striking advantage. Ribovics is a nasty striker, but also is a guy that has, in the past, done a good job in terms of taking his opponents to the ground and smashing them from that top position. The big qualm that I had with his regional run was that he was facing low-level opponents, but he's showcasing that he can be competitive against some of these UFC level guys. He's been splitting time over there at Kill Cliff FC as well as a gym, I believe down there in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. But he's clearly shown that he has some solid hands, improving skill set, but the issue throughout his career has been the takedown game, as we saw Loic Ruziboev land 11 takedowns against him, and Kamwela Kirk, I believe, landed 3. Now, I expect Terrence McKinney to utilize some high kicks early, that speed, power, look to get that early knockout, or if it doesn't work within the first couple of shots that he throws, go for that takedown and look to get that dominant position quickly on the mat where he should be able to get Ribovics out of there. I think Ribovics is of the level that McKinney can actually go out there and squash early, but the spot that I'd be heaviest on is the under 1.5. I think if McKinney does fail to get Ribovics out of there, Ribovics has that tenacity and that aggressiveness to actually sense that McKinney is slowing down heavily and he will turn on the burners and he'll likely get McKinney out of there. So I don't mind the underdog shot on McKinney, maybe even McKinney round 1, but the under 2.5 around that minus 220, minus 250 range, I'm all for it. So give me McKinney round 1, but the under 1.5 is a must play, especially in Terrence McKinney fights. All right, next up, we got Chase Hooper coming in at plus 135 in this lightweight tilt, going up against Vyacheslav Borshchev, who comes in at minus 155. This is a fight that's been talked about on the timelines a lot of polarizing opinions on either side. How do I feel about it? Let's get into it. First fighter that we'll talk about is the grappler Chase Hooper, who is currently on a 2-fight winning streak, finishing his last opponent, Jordan Levitt, showcasing his slick transitions and ability to take the back of his opponent and sink in that choke to get the tap. Hooper is a guy that's tried to improve his striking game, but it's obvious it's not going to get to the level of his grappling, so he's accepted the fact that he's going to have to crash the pocket with wild, reckless strikes, look to utilize that to either club and sub his opponents or open up a level change and get his opponents to the ground and tie them up into a pretzel that way. He's still young, only 24 years old, and he's had some solid experience up until this point in his UFC run. I just don't know if he'll be able to crack that top 10 or top 5. if he doesn't continue on working on better ways in terms of getting the fight to the ground. This fight will be an ultimate test for him in terms of seeing if his reckless striking style will be effective enough against a slick kickboxer like he's fighting in Vyacheslav Borshchev. Hooper, decent durability, although we did see him get flatlined by Steve Garcia a couple fights back. He's very nasty on the mat. He's very good in terms of transitioning, throwing submissions off of his back, getting reversals, getting back to his feet if that's what he wants to do. But he is clearly most comfortable when he's able to get fights to the ground. He's improving his takedown entries ever so slightly, but he needs to really set them up with hands first because his opponents are always going to be looking for him to change levels and get fights to the mat. Now, his opponent this week in Vyacheslav Borshchev went to a draw last time against Nazim Sadikov. I believe he came in as an underdog that night. Had a great first round. Second round got hurt badly. Got a 10-8 round for Sadikov on 2 judges' scorecards. And then Borshchev managed to battle back in the third round to win that round, but unfortunately for him, we ended up seeing that fight go to a draw. We know what Borshchev is all about. Solid striker, good hands, good combinations, has some stinging power as well, which is going to be very difficult for a lot of opponents to deal with. The 2 opponents that he's come up short against were guys that were able to utilize effective grappling approaches. Mark Diakese, who pretty much drowned him. Mike Davis, who we all know is a top 10 guy that's just not been active enough. Solid performance from him there. But Borshchev has been improving not just his takedown defense, but his ability to work back to his feet and try to stay safe on the mat. But that's going to be tested ultimately here by Chase Hooper, especially if this fight does end up hitting the mat, because Hooper is probably the slickest BJJ specialist that Borshchev has gone up since joining the UFC roster. Now, I still end up on the Borshchev side here, as I do think that I think we'll see solid enough footwork from him here, landing big strikes on Hooper as Hooper recklessly closes the distance. I think Borshchev has done good enough work in terms of improving his takedown defense and get-ups enough that he could possibly survive on the mat. But I think the gap is quite wide for both guys in terms of the advantages that they hold here. But I still have to lean ever so slightly on the Borshchev side, as I think it's going to be harder for Hooper to get this fight to the ground than it is going to be for Borshchev to defend submissions and stay in a safe enough position. We've seen high-level BJJ black belts get fights to the ground and struggle to get finishes in certain spots, and that can end up happening here with Chase Hooper as well, especially with Borshchev knowing how much trouble he could be in should this fight hit the mat. Again, close fight, but I still lean the Borshchev side. Again, footwork, shots down the pipe, hopefully good enough takedown defense. Hopefully he doesn't overextend too much where Hooper can get that level change that he needs to blast into a takedown. I'm seeing people talk about some of the late takedowns that Sadikov and Davis were able to get against Borshchev. I don't think he was worried as much about takedowns from those guys as he will be here against Hooper. But again, we'll see once they start throwing down in the spot. So I'll lean Borshchev. But a very dangerous fight on both sides. I can definitely understand people taking the underdog shot on a guy like Hooper, especially considering the grappling edge he'll have here. But I'm going to lean with Borshchev and hope that his takedown defense has been improved enough and his get-ups and submission defense has been good enough for him to eventually work back to his feet and put the punishment back on Hooper as he continues to demoralize him and possibly find that knockout. All right, let's move over to the heavyweight division where we have Waldo Cortes-Acosta coming in at plus 175, going up against Rebellis Despaigne coming in at minus 205. We'll start off on the Cortes-Acosta side, who has managed to string together 2 straight wins since dropping his first professional loss to Marcos Rogerio de Lima in a fight where he was leg kicked to death and then eventually taken down and grinding out from that top position. Cortes-Acosta is a guy that normally utilizes a lot of movement and sticks by his jab very well. It's interesting because he comes from a baseball background where he was a pitcher, and you can see forms of that pitching style with the overhand right that he tries to throw every now and then behind the jab that he likes to stay active with. He has solid cardio for a fighter of his stature, does a great job in terms of traversing the cage and just keeping output and volume high against his opponents. Picked up his biggest win last time around against legend and veteran Andrei Arlovsky by outstriking him. Now, not on numbers-wise, Arlovsky actually landed 9 more significant strikes than him, but it was the damage and clear effects that Cortes-Acosta had in the first and third rounds, which ultimately got him the win that night. Clearly, he needs to improve his grappling game still, as that's where opponents have been able to take advantage of him, most notably Marcos Rogerio de Lima. But he's still a very solid prospect, even at 32 years old, especially with the style that he's able to implement against most of his opponents. Now, his opponent this weekend is a heavyweight that we haven't seen any before, pretty much. Despaigne has pretty much flatlined all 5 of his opponents within the first round. His last 4 opponents, he's been able to finish, I believe, within 20 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. His UFC debut against Josh Parisian 2 months ago, he was able to finish him in 18 seconds. That was a very weird matchup, as Josh Parisian charged at him chin up in the air and allowed Rebellis to just land that big shot and put him down. It's clear we've never seen a guy like this before. 6'7", 87-inch reach, Taekwondo background, very fast with his hands, and has insane knockout power. That's only going to work against a certain level of heavyweight. That style will get him far against the bottom half of the division, or even up to maybe the top 7 guys in the division. But once guys are able to push him up against the cage, take him to the ground, things will start to get very shaky for Rebellis at that point in time. We can't overlook the fact that in his first fight, he got held up against the cage for 3.5 minutes until his opponent seemed to gas out, and then he was able to land that big shot to put him away. There will be fighters that can get that style going. I thought Parisian would be smart enough to try to, clinch him up and put him into the cage. But for some reason, he decided to just run forward and allow himself to get knocked out. Now, in this matchup, Cortes-Acosta is a guy that will probably stick with his bread and butter, which is that jab and his movement. But I think that's going to cause him some trouble here against a very massive Despaigne, who's going to have that huge speed advantage and power advantage in this matchup. Now, Waldo Cortes-Acosta has never been knocked out in MMA, but he has been knocked out twice in boxing over the course of the last 4 years. I believe that this will be another similar fight for Rebellis, where he should be able to get that early finish. Unless Cortes-Acosta fights unlike we've never seen him before, which would be clinching and takedowns, I just don't think that will be effective here against Rebellis, who I think will put on the pressure on him pretty much immediately, land that big shot and put him away. I'm a guy that is looking to fade guys of Rebellis' level and style. 35 years old, knockout heavy, and hasn't shown anything else in his game, but there's going to be a certain level of fighter. Once we get there, I'll let you guys know. I thought Parisian would be the guy, but he came in with a horrible game plan. I think the way he matches up with Cortes-Acosta, he'll probably be able to flatline him. Minus 200 is not the line to take, in my opinion. I think maybe just honing in on that round 1 KO prop, which I saw roughly around even money, is probably the better way to go about it. But yeah, I'm a big Cortes-Acosta guy, but I think that this will be a bad matchup for him as Rebellis goes out there and finds the knockout in the first round. All right, moving over to the featherweight division, we got Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres coming in at plus 170, going up against Sean Woodson, who comes in at minus 195. We'll start off on the Bruce Leroy side here, who picked up a loss last time around against Giga Chikadze in a matchup that I thought his unorthodox striking style would cause Chikadze some issues, but Chikadze met him with power anytime we saw Caceres try to cross the pocket with any of his unorthodox strikes or maneuvers that he likes to throw. We didn't even see Caceres get anywhere close to utilizing his jiu-jitsu, which has been sneaky for him in the past, but he's already won in the fact that he's managed to keep a UFC career for 13 years after being a guy that I thought was largely just famous because of the Bruce Leroy character that he would bring to the table. But it's clear that he has a certain advantage over a certain level of fighter and has been improving throughout these last 13 years as well. He's 35 years old. His time is probably coming to an end very shortly, but he's still a guy that can provide a lot of issues. Again, very unorthodox striker, loves the spinning stuff, loves the flying stuff, does a good job in terms of closing the distance with speed and power. But if he's fighting guys that are way better in a specific discipline than him, then he's usually going to end up coming up on the short end of the stick, as we've been seeing throughout his current 5-fight run that he's on right now, where he's 3-2. His opponent this weekend, Sean Woodson, is now 4-0-1 over his last 5 fights. Last time around, going out there into enemy territory against Charles Jourdain and winning, I thought, cleanly on the scorecards. He did a great job in terms of utilizing his lanky style, that 6'2", 78-inch reach, utilizing that crazy jab down the pipe. following up with the 2 behind it, showcasing his improved takedown defense throughout his career. And he does a great job in terms of utilizing every inch of that cage and just his movement, his jab down the pipe. His opponents get very frustrated when they're being stuck out at bay and they're unable to really get much offense off without any success. And I thought, even though I did take a shot on Sean Woodson as a dog last time around against Jourdain, there was that danger that Jourdain's unorthodox approach to most of his fights with his striking style and the power in which he throws would possibly cause Woodson some issues, but Woodson snuffed it all out. He stayed away from any shots or any type of spin that we saw from Jourdain. We saw him get out of the way very well. The only qualm that I had with Woodson's performance that night was going for the takedown late in that fight and getting caught in the guillotine, even though he popped his head out. That was the only way Charles Jourdain was going to win that fight, but luckily Woodson was able to keep his head out of that bad position afterwards. But again, Woodson, nasty boxer, good striker, maintains his distance very well, and I think Caceres is going to be in for a rough night here as he gets stuck out to dry at distance. I don't think that we'll see Woodson land as impactful shots as Chikadze, but I think that we'll see him land enough shots to really bust up the nose of Caceres, keeping him at distance. Caceres does provide the similar threat that Jourdain did in terms of the wacky unorthodox striking style, but I think that we saw from Woodson in his last fight that he can stop that. He can ensure that he keeps these types of guys at range. Caceres' his jiu-jitsu game, clearly better than Woodson, but I don't think his takedown game is there and good enough to get Woodson to the ground unless he's able to crack him with a big shot and put him down. But I think we'll see Woodson showcases discipline, patience, striking style once again, and utilize a very good output, volume, and striking game to touch Caceres up from distance and keep him at bay. So give me Woodson and Woodson by decision. Next up in the lightweight division, we got Diego Ferreira coming in at plus 330, going up against, I believe, the biggest favorite on the card, Mateusz Rebecki, or Rebecki, I believe is how it's pronounced, coming in at minus 400. Now, let's start off on the Diego Ferreira side, who managed to snap a 3-fight losing streak last time around after coming back from an injury, if I'm not mistaken, and I really thought that was a spot that we would see Ferreira come up short. And there was a good start from Michael Johnson, but his durability and chin was unable to keep up with the big power that Ferreira was throwing with, eventually stifling and knocking out Michael Johnson very badly. It was probably one of the more eerie knockouts that we've seen, considering how out Michael Johnson was that night, completely stiffened up his body. But Ferreira was a guy that was probably one of the better lightweights on the roster between 2016 and 2020 during that insane run that he was on, until he eventually ran into Beneil Dariush, who was able to shut his game down completely and give him his second defeat to him. Actually, that's 0-2 now for Ferreira against Beneil. Then we saw Gregor Gillespie go out there and finish him, and then Matthias Gamrot finish him as well, although it seemed it was due to an injury that Ferreira needed to take a lot of time off to rehab from. Now 39 years old, it's clear that Ferreira is slowing down a little bit, but that power is going to be tough for a lot of opponents to deal with. He's a BJJ black belt. Normally when he is at his best, he utilizes his aggressiveness, keeps his opponents on their back foot, throws out big shots, gets his grappling going, and uses that control to hurt his opponents from that top position. He's still dangerous off of his back with the submissions that he can throw up, has a nasty armbar that he can implement as well, creates scrambles pretty effectively as well, has a great head coach in Saif Sayu to help game plan some fights for him. But I think at 39 years old, it's going to be very hard for him to be successful against some of the higher level lightweights that are on the roster, especially considering the level of talent that we have at this 155-pound division. This weekend, he goes up against Matthias Rebecki, who is currently on a nasty winning streak. I believe it's 16 straight fights that he's currently on. 3 of those coming in the UFC after being signed from the Contender series, I believe, in 2022. BJJ black belt in his own right, an absolute tank of a man. The way that he does a great job in terms of pressuring his opponents, he walks them down, utilizes a lot of side-to-side movement, throws his big winging hooks, hoping to hurt his opponents, but eventually he wants to get in on the takedown, and once he gets a hold of his opponents, he picks them up like a sack of potatoes and slams them to the mat, and then eventually starts getting to work, either looking to control them, or often he finds that finish and gets them out of there as well. This is a guy that has solid cardio for the course of 15 minutes too. So even if he's unable to finish his opponents, we'll see him go out there and just keep a hellacious pace that not a lot of opponents are able to get the better of, or at least deal with. In his last fight against Roosevelt Roberts, I saw a lot of people giving flack to him for losing the back position against Roberts. But if you notice, he is the one that makes the first move that allows Roberts to eventually get out of that spot because he's going for the armbar. And what did we see? He gets the armbar pretty much right away. So Rebecki, very talented, very intelligent on the mat, and just an absolute powerhouse, a very difficult opponent for a lot of people to deal with, especially at lightweight. He's only 31 years old. This is going to be probably the biggest one of his career if he's able to get his hand raised, and this could get him, into the rankings and against more notable guys in the lightweight division. And maybe in 2025 we see him inch his way into that title contention if he can stay busy enough. In this matchup specifically, Ferreira will provide some issues, especially with this being the toughest matchup that Rebecki has taken to date. But I think it's still going to be very difficult for Ferreira to deal with the pace and pressure that Rebecki will put on him. I think we'll see Ferreira drown on the mat, and I think we'll see I don't think so drown so much so to the point that Rebecki will finish him unless Ferreira is that much far gone at this point. I don't think he is. I think he'll showcase enough resistance, but I think Rebecki will keep that pressure on him, keep him on his back foot, keep him on his butt, and then stifle him on the mat with that crushing top pressure that he brings to the table. So I'm going to go Rebecki, and Rebecki by decision. All right, next up, we got a light heavyweight matchup between Alonzo Menifield coming in at plus 225. He goes up against New Zealand striker Carlos Ulberg, who comes in at minus 265. Now, last time around, we saw Alonzo Menifield go out there and defeat Dustin Jacoby in a close fight, but it all came down to two big knockdowns that Menifield had in the second and third rounds. And even though he wasn't able to put away Jacoby, he still did enough in those rounds, or at least did enough damage with those knockdowns to get the fight called in his favor. But we saw what that fight looked like pretty much for 90% of it, which was Jacoby jabbing him from distance and doing good work from that long range spot with the combinations and 1-2s down the pipes and the kicks. And that seemed to very much cause Menifield a lot of troubles. But he still managed to uncork that big power to sway the judges back into his favor in rounds 2 and 3, which makes you wonder, he has a beatable style, but he seems to always find a way to implement his power to stay competitive in these matchups. How far is that going to take him, though? That's the big question mark, right? 36 years old, power is the last thing to go, so he'll still be able to hurt opponents, but how effectively he's going to continue to do that as he continues to take steps up in competition. His opponent this weekend, Carlos Ulberg, has known nothing but wins since dropping his UFC debut to Kennedy Nzechukwu. I believe he is now on a 5-fight winning streak. Last time around, picking up the first submission victory of his professional career as he battered Da Un Jung over the course of 2.5 rounds until he was able to get the fight to the ground and open up that rear naked choke where he was able to get the tap from his Korean counterpart. Carlos Ulberg, very solid striker, stays very busy with his lateral movement and that jab down the pipe, especially with the height and reach advantage he normally has over his opponents. He does a great job in terms of establishing his position. I think it's been encouraging to see the grappling improvements that we've been seeing from him, from the defensive aspect to even the offensive aspect as well. But make no bones about it, the best spot for him is to maintain that range, keeping his opponents at bay and just battering them from distance with that crisp jab down the pipe. Now, he's finished 3 of his last 5 opponents by knockout, and that goes to show that once he sees that opening, he will uncork with it, but he's also okay with just chipping away at distance and not overextending himself, leaving himself vulnerable to counters from his opponents. And that's what he's going to have to be very careful of this weekend with Menifield, as we've seen him change the tide of a fight plenty of times with just one big shot. So if Ulberg is able to stay safe at distance, this minus 265 could end up looking like minus 400 if he's able to evade those big shots of Menifield. Menifield might have some success by holding Ulberg up against the cage early on in this matchup, but I think as this fight starts to wear on, it's going to get harder for Menifield to do so, and we'll see Ulberg do very well in terms of just keeping that pace, keeping that distance, and keeping that range, and just battering Menifield up, blooding up the nose, like I said, like similar to, the Sean Woodson fight. I think this is a fight where if he just sticks to his jab and sticks to his lateral movement, something that we've been seeing him do a lot over his last several fights, it will work out very well for him in this spot. So I think Menifield will struggle to crash the pocket, struggle to get off on his big punches. And again, you have to assign a certain percentage to Menifield's possible knockout power and power advantage that he has in this fight. But if none of that comes to fruition, Ulberg will skate through this fight, I think. And I think he has a style to do so, and has shown he has the style to do so pretty effectively. So I'm going to go with Ulberg here. And I think he ends up winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, co-main event time. Joaquin Buckley gets his wish granted to him. Maybe not the main event slot, but the next best thing by getting this co-main event slot in his hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. He comes in as the minus 155 favorite in this welterweight tilt against Sultan Ruziboev, who comes in at plus 135 and hopes to make this 170-pound weight limit for the first time in 3.5 years. We'll start off on the Joaquin Buckley side, who's currently riding a 3-fight winning streak, none bigger than the victory that he held over Vicente Luque last time around, as he pummeled him over a round and a half until he eventually found that finish. Now, I'll say this. Seemed to me that Luque was not himself. I don't know if there was a big shot that Buckley landed early that caused Luque some issues, but there were plenty of moments in that fight where you're like, this is not Luque-like, right? When he gave up I think he pulled guard or he fell to his back, there was no sense of urgency for him to either throw up submissions or work back to his feet or throw any offense off of his back. It was very weird. But we still have to give Buckley his flowers that he put Luque in those positions. And I think a lot of it had to do with the power that Buckley was landing on him. Buckley is a guy that used to rely heavily on the just striking and knockout power that he had, but it's clear that he's working on the rest of his game. He's trying to incorporate some grappling, wearing on his opponents so that he can eventually open up with some big shots later when his opponents slow down, so that he can possibly get these knockouts later on in matchups as well. He's going up against Sultan Ruziboev, who is a very aggressive fighter, a guy that likes to utilize his size and his range, 6'5", 76-inch reach, but it's going to be interesting to see how he tries to make 170 pounds, especially with him only being a month removed or just over a month removed since his last victory, which came at 185 pounds against Cedric Dumas. Now, Ruziboev has competed at 170 pounds in the past. The guy doesn't look like a thick 6'5" frame. It seems like he is a little bit gangly, which could aid him getting to this 170-pound limit. So I wonder, where he was at weight-wise going into the fight with Dumas, and what makes him so comfortable that he can go down to 170 pounds for this matchup in such a short amount of time as well. Like I said, very aggressive no matter where he is, holds his range very well, utilizes that 1-2 down the pipe. Where I've seen him struggle in the past is when opponents have taken grapple-heavy approaches, where they're able to get him into the ground and smash him from that top position, or at least hold him down. That's what I expected Bruno Ferreira to do, but Ferreira was getting stuck at range, having to deal with the size and strength, or size and range advantage that Ruziboev had in that matchup, which allowed Ruziboev to eventually land out that big knockout shot. But I think we'll see Buckley bring in an educated game plan here. He's at a big size disadvantage, right? 7-inch height disadvantage, same reach, but the height is going to be something difficult for him to overcome. But I think that we'll see him mix in some grappling, mix in some big strikes, keep Ruziboev on the defensive for the most part of this. But I think it's the legitimate experience that Buckley has compared to the, Ruziboev side, who has fought some sketchy competition throughout his career. He is experienced, don't get me wrong. You're talking about a guy with 44 professional MMA fights, but not against, the type of competition that we've been seeing Buckley go against since making his UFC debut back in 2020. So I think that this is a spot that we'll see Buckley mix up the game totally. Get some takedowns, get some control time, but I think ultimately it's going to come down to him landing a big shot on Ruziboev as Ruziboev starts to slow down. Maybe the weight cut has some issues or causes some issues for him in the fight. Something to think about there. But there are still a lot of unknowns about Ruziboev's effectiveness fighting this level of competition. So I can't be overly confident on the Buckley side. You have to give some respect to the Ruziboev side. But I do think that we'll see Buckley showcase his experience, his fight IQ, and then eventually go out there and find a knockout over Ruziboev. I'm going to go Buckley knockout, probably round 2 or round 3. All right, that brings us to our main event of the evening, which goes down in the heavyweight division, as we have Derek Lewis coming in as a minus 155 favorite, going up against Rodrigo Nascimento, who comes in at plus 135. Now, you're seeing a lot of red in the last 5 for Derek Lewis there, and that's pretty much been the tale of his career at this point of his career at 39 years old, showcasing that he's pretty much a knockout or bust type of fighter. Very weird to me that he was able to survive 25 minutes with Jailton Almeida, pretty much smothering him for 21 of those 25 minutes, and still seeing the scorecards there. Normally when opponents are able to establish that dominant top position against him, they're able to get him out of there either by TKO or by finding a submission. He's still live to win fights early, just as we saw against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, where he blitzed pressed him right from the jump and eventually got a finish. He has that big power carried from rounds 1 to round 5, so that's something that his opponents will always have to worry about. But it's clear that he's just a novelty heavyweight at this point in time. A guy that has a big following, a guy that people will always want to watch, and a guy that the UFC can just plug into heavyweight main events and just say, there you go. There's a main event. And that's what a lot of people expected, or at least thought when they saw this main event, especially with the B-side being a guy like Rodrigo Nascimento, who's only on a 3-fight winning streak. And he's 11-1. Don't get me wrong. He's a fighter that had a lot of potential before he got knocked out by Chris Daukaus a couple years back, but seems to be a fighter that's really starting to tie things together, especially with the work that he's getting over there at American Top Team. You're seeing him mix in the grappling. You're seeing him be a little bit more comfortable in the striking realm as well, but striking with Derek Lewis is probably not the best way to go about it. Sure, he might be able to maintain his range, land his jab, land some good kicks, maybe see the big shots that are coming his way from Lewis and try to evade, maybe change levels and try to get the fight to the ground that way. So I understand the danger that comes from the Lewis side, but it's clear that Nascimento has way more paths to victory in this matchup. He will be in some danger late, as Lewis always has that blitz possible attack that could get the finish here. But I think Nascimento has a good enough takedown game and good enough game from that top position that once he does get this fight to the ground, he should be able to work to a dominant enough position to get Lewis out of there. Whether it's with the choke or whether it's with ground and pound, it's definitely a spot that he should be able to get a finish. So to get a fighter like Nascimento at plus 135 against a KO artist like Lewis, who we know is knockout or bust, I think you got to go with the Brazilian side here. I get it. Maybe he's not deserving of this main event slot. I get it. He got knocked out by Chris Daukaus a couple years back. Daukaus, hand speed, decent power of his own, whereas Lewis might be telegraphing his shots a little bit too much, and that will allow Nascimento to get out of the way of those shots. And American Top Team, they know how to game plan for a guy like Derek Lewis, who's as dangerous as he is. So to bet Nascimento as a favorite, again, that's probably not the way to go, especially considering his inexperience against this level of competition and the danger that Lewis brings to the table. But again, you could bet Nascimento up to minus 150 again with the technical advantages he has in this matchup. But betting Derek Lewis as a favorite, I think, is a no-no. Derek Lewis is a guy that you try to back as an underdog or even just taking his KO prop because he's always going to be at a skill discrepancy no matter what. In this matchup, Nascimento, more tools, more paths to victory. I think he eventually gets this fight to the ground, and I think he actually opens up a submission opportunity for himself. So I'm going to go Nascimento by sub. I'm hoping that we get some more Derek Lewis love throughout fight week so we can get a better number on Nascimento. So I'm kind of just sitting tight until we see that number move any which way. But I think Nascimento is not a bad dog play this weekend. Again, Lewis will always be a knockout threat, but Nascimento clearly has more paths to victory in this spot. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC St. Louis. I thought there was only one card this weekend that I'll be breaking down, but there are actually two more. There will be a KSW card on Saturday afternoon, as well as a PFL Middle East regional event on Friday that I'll be breaking down. Both of those will be in written form on the Patreon page. If you want access to that, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page below. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow, Wednesday, for the top 3 Lock of the Night and top 3 Dog of the Night candidate segments. I'll see you guys then. Peace.
Last thing,